Hello, in this video I will be reviewing Republic of Thieves, which is the third book in the Gentleman Bastards series, which is the series Lies of Locke Lamora series. So, once again, getting into a spoiler-free review, this book is worse than the first two, in multiple ways. However, it does have, like the second book, it does have a couple of strengths which kind of make it worth reading, and perhaps, like, if someone told me this was their favourite book in the series, I wouldn't look at them like they were totally crazy, because it does kind of have some specific stuff going on in it, which to certain readers would make it perhaps more interesting than the first two. But for me, I'll say that, yeah, for me, it was definitely the weakest book of the series by a fair margin. But with that said, it's still fantastic. It still has, like I discussed in the previous video, it still has, these kind of amazing characters, which I find to be really interesting and enjoyable. And it still kind of has that same, vibe and depth to the story, which really brings you in. And so, even though I do believe that for myself it was a much sort of lesser quality of story, it's still... I could understand if someone told me this was their favourite book in the series, I wouldn't think they were totally crazy. And like I said, it's, all of these books are fantastic. I'm comparing it just to the other two books. If I compared it to, fantasy books in general, it's still a fantastic book, and I still strongly recommend you read it. But yeah, just comparing it to some of the previous two books, I do think it's a bit weaker. So, spoilers time. This book kind of takes place in an election. So, we have the Bonds Magi. If you read the first two books, we've got our Bonds Magi, who are these, like a big, group of mages who kind of monopolize magic in the world, and, they all live in this one city, and basically it's a normal city, they just happen to live there, right? And so this normal city has elections and stuff, and they kind of have a game where basically what they do is they just kind of rig these elections, like, just for fun, just for the meme, and then whoever wins, they each choose a side, and if you're on the winning side of a rigged election, doesn't really mean anything necessarily, but you just have a good giggle, and tell your friends, haha, I beat you in that rigged election. And so the story kind of takes place in the sense that Locke and Jean are brought in to be the consultants for rigging this election, essentially is basically how it is. And as I'm sure that, just hearing me describe it, you can already kind of pick out some of the flaws of the story, which is that the stakes feel, at least for the main part of the plot, feel horribly low and kind of pointless, like, they literally describe it that this election doesn't matter. We're literally told that kind of repeatedly. So, me as a reader, I'm kind of like, well, this election doesn't matter, so, cool, we're just having a bit of fun, and to be fair, like I say, it actually is fun. They do various, shenanigans to rig the election. They try and bring in immigrants and get them signed up, before the other side can get them signed up. And, they burn down the opponent's voting house and all these sort of fun little things. It is fun. But ultimately, this part of the plot, at least, does feel very pointless, because we've literally been told it's pointless. It doesn't matter which side wins, nothing changes. And it's all just a bit of a meme for the Bonds Magi. We're just having a bit of fun. And so, yeah, like I say, it kind of just reduces some of the stakes of the story, takes it from, like some of the previous two books where, the stakes felt really high, to just kind of, we're just having a bit of fun with selection. But, kind of, in saying that, like I've said in these previous videos, I love these characters so much that just them having a bit of fun in election is still good to me. I still enjoy it, and I still had a fantastic time reading this book. But yeah, so that's kind of half the plot, is just this election rigging. The other half of the plot is kind of Bonds Magi, lore, like stuff, what's going on with them. And I will say that is perhaps the stronger half. And that's why I said, in the introduction section, I said to some people this might be a favourite book. Well, if you're interested in, like, world building and lore and, kind of understanding, like, more about an author's mind through their work, how they're building a world, then I definitely think that this book is for you, because we learn a lot more about the world we're in. And we learn a lot more about the Bonds Magi and, the previous, the Eldrin, which I mentioned in the first video, and we learn a lot more about the history of the world through this book. And we also learn possibly a lot more about Locke's character as well, so we got both the world-building lore and then kind of the lore of the characters, if that makes sense. And so if you're into that sort of thing, then perhaps this would actually be one of your favourite books, because you really kind of get to dig a bit deeper into what's going on. So there's definitely that to think about. But for me... and then I guess, like, the C plot, there's A and B, then C plot is Locke's relationship with Sabetha, which is, to me, a little bit underwhelming. So a lot of time is dedicated to it, both in Locke's perspective, a lot of his psychology and stuff is dedicated to it, as well as a lot of flashback time, so literal just page count is dedicated to this. And to me, it does feel a little bit underwhelming, where I'm kind of like, it just feels like some random chick who just happens to be competent, and it doesn't necessarily... And, we're told from the start that Locke was infatuated with her, which is fine, but it also feels like, it's like, well, if it just kind of happened randomly, you're walking down the street, you're like, oh, that chick's amazing, I'm infatuated with her, then it kind of makes it feel, it's like, well, there's not much to dig deeper there, I understand, it's just like, oh, I was infatuated with her, cool. And kind of a bit of C plot kind of interacts with the B plot, because at one stage I try and tell Locke that the reason he was infatuated with her was because he's actually been like resurrected and had a red-haired wife, which, you know, if true, big if true, but we don't necessarily know it's true. And so yeah, like I say, this plot on it doesn't necessarily function that well for me. Because, like I say, it just sort of feels a bit underwhelming. I will say that the flashbacks in this, they do form like an interesting story in their own right. But for me, it almost feels like it could have been done better as a short story. You know, if you gave me 100 pages or whatever it is of the flashbacks all together, full story, done, then I might even have enjoyed that more than kind of having them interspersed throughout the book. Because, like I say, it kind of suffers from that problem where you kind of in two places at once. You're like, oh, what's going on in the story? Nope, we're just chucked into this flashback, you know. And there's nothing wrong with the flashback, and I thought it was interesting and actually quite cool. But just for me, well, I don't necessarily like my story structured this way. And I've criticized other books for this as well. At least, you know, like for example, I'm not the biggest fan of some of Brandon Sanderson's flashbacks, even though in their own thing they're cool. But I'm just like, I'm listening to this story, and now you're throwing this story, another story at me. And so I wasn't a huge fan of that. And then, so it might sound like I'm being quite negative in this review, and perhaps I am, because I was mildly disappointed. And this is the second time I've listened to these books. I kind of knew this was coming, but once again, I was kind of just mildly disappointed with this third book. I just kind of sort of felt like it didn't really go anywhere. And to be fair, I think Scott Lynch has planned this series to be 7 books. So it's kind of one of those things where, you know, this is kind of almost middle book syndrome type of thing. It's just kind of coasting along. We're learning a bit more, we're getting a bit deeper, but we're not really at, you know, the climax or anything of the story yet. So, and that's fine, but that does lead to this book itself suffering a little bit. But with that said, you know, I like I say, it sounds like I'm talking really bad about this book, but I actually had a fantastic time reading it, because like I say, the strengths are all there, you know, that he pulls you into the world. The setting feels really real and interesting, Carthane, and he really pulls you into his world and pulls you into the characters. For example, the start, you know, where Locke was dying, you know, he had poison and stuff, and Joel was trying to save him. You know, I really felt for that. I like felt pulled in by that scene. You know, I really felt for Joel. I really felt like sort of his pain, you know, and his desperation, you know, and it showed for his actions as well. We're told about his desperations, but when we're showed for his actions that he's also desperate. He does some kind of dumb things, but he does them because he believes that, you know, he goes and gets a doctor by force, and he knows it's dumb, but he does it anyway because that's how much he cares, and so it makes me care as well. So even, you know, this character stuff is really fantastic. And for me, like I said in the end of the last video, these books just kind of have this extra something that really pulls me in and drags me in and makes me care and feel committed. And I think it's kind of a combination of sort of Scott Lynch's authorial style and world building, well, not necessarily world building, but like kind of a description of the setting, that combined with how wonderful these characters are. I think even though, you know, I've talked a lot about how, you know, there's a lot of flaws of the story in terms of stakes and, you know, flashbacks, and how you don't necessarily feel that committed to the election or at all to the election. But even with all those things, the characters are so fantastic, and the kind of the way the setting is described and where you're pulled in is so fantastic, but I actually still had a great time. You know, anyway, I would still recommend this book if you ask me, although I would you know, caution you with those flaws that I just discussed. But yeah, I hope you really enjoyed this video, and have a great day. See ya.